Well, welcome back. Thanks for being with us here on Morning Live. Now, yesterday, the Special Investigating Unit, or the SIU, described former Gauteng Health MEC Dr. Bandile Masuku's interpretation of the High Court judgment into PPE tender fraud investigations as flawed. Now, this comes after Masuku released a statement welcoming the ANC's National Disciplinary Committee's ruling clearing him and suspended presidential spokesperson Kusela Diko of any wrongdoing in the personal protective equipment corruption saga. The committee says that Masuku and Diko can return to their political functions as Gauteng Executive Committee members. So to talk to us more about these issues and other political party developments navigating their readiness for this year's local government elections, we're joined by political analyst and author Professor Susan Boysen. Prof, good to see you again. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina.
So let's start with the SIU and Masuku, and the SIU feeling compelled to come out and release a statement to clarify things because they say, according to them, Bandile Masuku's interpretation of what they had said about the court judgment seems to be somewhat flawed. So your interpretation of what was said and where you believe that the SIU is correct and perhaps Dr. Bandile Masuku misinterpreting.
Yes, these are interesting times indeed in terms of ANC internal processes, procedures for disciplining members, and how that intersects with other processes in the state apparatuses. And we can see there are so many converging lines here that it sometimes makes it difficult to assess exactly who is where at what point. We could take a cue perhaps from President Ramaphosa himself when he, there on the sidelines of a public event, indicated that it is an internal investigation, for example, against his own former spokesperson, now suspended spokesperson, Kusela Diko, and then the SIU coming out with a statement saying there is more to it than Bandile Masuku's statement. And the regret being expressed in ANC circles itself that it's not left to the National Disciplinary Committee of the ANC itself to make those statements, that it was stated that it was premature for Masuku and perhaps then for Diko as well to come out with their statements. And it really shows a need to get serious coordination between these different processes, the party processes on the one hand, where it is both at the provincial disciplinary committee level, and there was an appeal to the National Disciplinary Committee. Now it's back to provincial to make statements there and to determine whether there will be continuation in public office of persons like Bandile Masuku, in whose place another person has already been appointed. But yes, there would have to be serious consideration of that. So it is a really confusion of disciplinary lines at this stage. But that we do know is that SIU is clear that they have got grounds for the investigation, and that more has to be said around that before there can be final exonerations, if exonerations at all.
So we look at that. So the SIU basically saying we are continuing with criminal investigation. So this is not the end of the line. And then you have the ANC for their part basically reinstating Kusela Diko and Dr. Bandile Masuku to their roles in the Provincial Executive Council. So what should we make of that in terms of how the ANC's disciplinary entities have actually dealt with these matters related to personal protection, protective equipment fraud?
Well, Sakina, like all others, I'm looking forward to seeing the National Disciplinary Committee's, the NDC's statement itself, how they could have come to this conclusion that the SIU had not provided information. The SIU is sitting on an ongoing case, and perhaps there was a need to postpone and prolong the hearings or the process rather than saying there is no evidence. Perhaps at this stage there is not conclusive evidence, while that is an ongoing investigation. But it certainly points to the need to coordinate the timelines on these disciplinary processes. Else there's really going to be a cacophony of different messages and uncertainties as to where the processes can move to next.
Prof, we also saw the president handing over title deeds to 30 black farmers. And during that occasion, President Ramaphosa very optimistic about how the ANC was dealing with its internal challenges. What's your interpretation of that? The way the ANC has gone about what seems to be unprecedented levels of internal strife at this point with none other than the party's Secretary General at the helm or seemingly at the center of all that's going on.
Yes, Sakina, we think that the current week is a definitive one, both in terms of these other processes around Masuku and Biko, and then Ismagashule. We, as today, the National Working Committee of the ANC will be meeting to deliberate on Magashule and no doubt on the other cases as well. And we see in the Northern Cape those processes around conferences and challenges to conferences, those are unfolding. And it is really a week that we will look at the ANC to see what it is planning, whether it's planning to take more definitive action than now, because the ANC approach to date has very much been, as the president also actually emphasized in his remarks, was that to let processes unfold, to let the processes take their course. And in several respects, the current week is a point where those processes have actually ended or reached definitive moments, and they go beyond the point where the ANC can just say they let the processes unfold. So when it comes to NWC today, and maybe longer than that, and what kind of recommendation they make to the NEC, that will help us give a definitive answer to your question. But it is certainly a week in which the ANC can, in many respects, no longer kick the can down the road.
No, they can't. If we look at the Francis Bard region in the Northern Cape, for example, you have an attempted interdict there by members of the African National Congress in the lead up to the provincial elective conference. Now, that, along with all the other legal challenges that we are seeing, what should the ANC make of that? And what should we as the broader public looking on make of all these legal challenges, Professor?
And Sakina, I actually believe the Northern Cape one and developments in the last few weeks there and the past weekend are quite important as a prototype of how we're going to see contestation unfolding around the ANC's forthcoming conferences, provincial conference, for example, or other conferences. In the Northern Cape, it was one region that had to meet over the weekend. That one couldn't happen because the necessary number of delegates had not materialized. Although, as the ANC in Northern Cape has assured people, the provincial conference in the forthcoming weekend is not in danger. And that, of course, is one where President Ramaphosa has got a very strong standing in the Northern Cape. And I believe we see the challenges. They are internal in ANC. They are factional, almost by definition. They're also in terms of branch constitutions, biannual branch general meetings, so what they call BBGMs. Those are challenges on different kind of fronts. And I think this is a prototype for forthcoming conferences, whether they be branch, regional, or provincial, that there are challenges to try to uproot the established order and perhaps destabilize areas where one faction has got particularly strong standing, because that will be part of the strategy of, call it factionalists in the ANC, who try to uproot and destabilize the Ramaphosa's hold on power, which has been strengthening, and it's from that branch level up that we see these challenges materializing. And so it is very important to get that an instability in at that level if they want to challenge Ramaphosa's.
So we look at what is happening in the Northern Cape, and one can almost expect more of the same in some of the other provinces in the lead up to these provincial elective conferences. But importantly, there's a lot of talk. One would listen to the Secretary General, for example, Prof, talking about the branches, the importance of the branches in ANC structures and the power that lies in these ANC branches. And taking that Francis Bard region as an example again, the allegation there is that the general meetings at those branches were unlawful and they were unconstitutional. So if we now see all of this strife trickling down to the branch level, again, how is the ANC going to deal with this? If you take a province like KZN, for example, where there does seem to be a pushback and a fight back campaign happening on the ground, how should the ANC deal with this matter?
Well, Northern Cape probably provides one small example here. The court case to try to put a hold on a provincial conference that has been thwarted. It was thrown out. And many of the specific complaints have been sorted out at dispute level, dispute structures within ANC in that province. And so that is probably these are probably indications for the ANC to take extreme care when it does branch meetings, the BBGMs going forward, that it is absolutely legitimately constituted by validated ANC members and that the necessary quora were achieved in those meetings, because every aspect of those meetings are going to be under scrutiny as we move into the next phase. The ANC has to hold its National General Council meeting probably sometime this year. It's overdue because of COVID. It could not happen because those are truly mass meetings. And there are questions whether those can be held effectively virtually. And then very close to the end of next year will be the ANC's next elected conference. And so we're really in the run up to those very crucial events. And each and every aspect of the ANC's process of nominating and electing those delegates through what structures, how those structures were constituted, there's going to be scrutiny around each and every corner. And there's no way that it can be taken forward except in the perfectly legitimate and legal way.
And just coming back to the president on Saturday, handing over those title deeds to 30 black farmers, the land question and the African National Congress again. And we saw Parliament embarking on a very thorough process of crisscrossing this country, listening to the people, canvassing their views on the question of land expropriation without compensation. But that seems to have stalled somewhat, if you will, in terms of the African National Congress in particular, and just that question in general. What's your view on this, Professor? Has the ANC somewhat taken a step back on ensuring that that particular land question is front and center and dealt with as soon as possible?
It is very difficult to distinguish in COVID times where all the previous actions had to take different formats and Parliament took on a new, slower momentum, a lower profile momentum. It's very difficult to say that it has totally lost that momentum, but it's necessary to get evidence and evidence from the ANC that it is not dropping that ball. Because we know much of the criticism against the ANC and its implementation of land policy in the past has been that so many instruments have existed. The possibilities have been immense, and not enough has been done even in terms of available possibilities. And there's really more of an expression of political will, determination to see through processes on more drastic, more radical land reform that can be done in terms of existing legislation, but will also get another set of big impetus if the constitutional amendment to Section 25 is advanced. So the ANC has got a lot of credibility to gain and to reconfirm on the land issue, and not just in terms of rural and agricultural land, but in terms of urban land. Huge new impetus is required there, because that is where the big land hunger is. That is where internal migration is happening to even more than before in the economically desperate COVID and post-COVID times.
And then we look at the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, and what's happening in the DA, another high-profile resignation, and how the DA has dealt with this, where they basically released a statement saying that Phumzile Van Dam had resigned as member of the party and as a member of parliament. Van Dam coming back and saying, no, actually, I had resigned as a member of parliament and not as a member of the party. I'm still a DA member. So looking at them and how they've been dealing with what's been happening within the Democratic Alliance, what's your assessment there, Professor?
Yes, the DA is probably the ANC's greatest savior, because if opposition had not been so weak, the ANC would probably have been in some trouble in mobilizing the electorate. But opposition and DA remains by far, in terms of percentage points, for example, the leading opposition party in South Africa, but they really serially are not getting things right and not stemming the outflow of big name, good name, black leaders. And on top of that, and black in a broader sense of the word, and in the last week in the local government by-elections, we have seen the DA lose ground in the traditional colored communities to an organization like the Patriotic Alliance. And so on two fronts, those constituencies, broader Black African and then colored, where the DA has been looking to extend its support, to grow its support. It needs to grow in those communities in order to do anything more in electoral politics and politics generally in South Africa. And yet on these two fronts, it has really been slipping. And so in the virtual reality rally over the weekend, seemingly good numbers registering and on that platform, but yet we don't see evidence that they are getting their messaging right to exploit, make use of those weaknesses that the ANC is suffering, and to slip into that space. The DA so far is just not managing that at all.
And Professor, as you say, that digital online rally and rallies of that kind that one would imagine will become the norm. You know, when we look at traditional ways of mobilizing ahead of local of elections, be they local government or general elections, if against the COVID backdrop, these online rallies are going to become the norm, how do we assess the party's popularity in the lead up to the elections? And also, given this disruption that COVID has presented, how do you think this is going to impact on the parties and how they actually go about getting their messages out before the local government elections?
Yes, indeed. COVID has really turned this into a new game. We could see from this rally of the DA over the weekend as an illustration, and they usually pull out all the stops and get these technical and imaging of events around launches, etc., get those right and invest a lot of money in it. And by the best of standards, and that will probably be the same for other political parties, including the DA, it's a really bland event in compared with what the in-person mass rallies are that we've become used to. So it's a totally new game. And how to make this virtual platform to represent a mass image where just mass convergence is not possible. That is going to be the big issue, one of the big questions for political parties moving ahead. And house-to-house canvassing, people are probably not keen to open doors, receive guests, even if it's just a few people wanting to do canvassing outside the door. And parties are going to have to rely so much more on digital platforms, on social media. And social media do not have a good standing in terms of political credibility because so much false messaging is possible there. So it's going to really pose incredible challenges to political parties to get that across. And then to hope that on election day, people will feel safe. We know Justice Ikgang Moseneke is doing an investigation now for the IEC to get confirmation that it's fine to have those elections and it will be safe enough to do that. We know in many places around the world those elections have been going forward, but political parties will have to do an individual mind shift and rely on the voters for those individual decisions. And that's a big change that we probably see there, to make it possible for voters to take that informed individual decision, perhaps more than going for a mass feeding or the latest campaign on social media.
Professor Susan Boyson, as always, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate having you here on Morning Live. Political analyst and author Professor Susan Boyson helping us navigate through some of the political stories this past weekend and over the last week. With that, it's time for our latest news here on Morning Live.